Mommy's promise comes first, so please go to the hospital with this. My husband takes out $20 from his wallet and hands it to me. Overwhelmed by the unexpected turn of events, I could only stand dumbfounded, watching him drive away in his car. Unbelievably, he left his wife, struggling with her water broken, to prioritize picking up and dropping off his mother for her hobby classes. Despite the harassment from his mother and the numerous difficulties I faced, I tolerated it all, thinking of our soon-to-be-born child. But now it's clear to me, someone who treats their child so poorly doesn't deserve to be a parent, bearing the recurring pain. I made up my mind to face childbirth alone. My name is Kristen. I married Scott right after graduating from college. Scott and I have an age difference of 3 years, and we have led a fairly happy life. He was one of my college clubmates. He seemed to have taken a liking to me when I joined as a freshman, and looking back, his passionate advances were almost embarrassing. As a young adult, a guy's appealing inevitably seemed cool, and I reciprocated his affection, leading to a smooth relationship from 3 months after my enrollment until graduation. Even after marriage, he was deeply in love with me, so I never worried about infidelity. However, he's always been particularly kind to women, attracting some attention. But since he was always devoted to me, I never let my gaze wander. Yet, there's a reason why I described our seemingly perfect marriage as fairly happy. That reason is his mother, Evelyn's presence. I thought the mother-in-law and daughter-in-law conflict was a thing of the past, but she frowned upon seeing me.
What's the purpose for today? Because all of a sudden, his pardon should have informed me in advance so that I could be prepared properly. Besides, you have no gifts even being invited home. It was said, ring her out, it's just bad manners. I tell me bad. That you are leaders. You should have taken care of all of these. Oh dear, why don't you leave my son and go home today?
That's what she said during my first visit to my in-laws' house before our marriage. And being still young, I turned pale with fear. Although I told her about the schedule to visit beforehand indeed. I should have brought some gifts to meet Evelyn for the first time at her house, feeling embarrassed and frustrated at being seen through. I remained downcast for a while. It was my fault for the etiquette breach, but if Evelyn had been a bit more restrained in her words, I wouldn't have been so upset. Because of my failure, I was virtually separated from Scott and had to return alone for my first visit to my in-laws, leading to a phone call from Scott later.
Mommy was nervous and ended up being a bit harsh. She actually likes you, Riskin, so don't worry. She approves of our marriage and really wants you to visit again.
At that moment, I was infuriated by his optimistic tone. He didn't advise me before visiting her house and wouldn't stop Evelyn when she insulted me right in front of him. Her wanting me to visit again was undoubtedly not her true intention. Would marrying him mean being pressured into living together and facing daily harassment? Surprisingly, she made no such suggestions when I decided to marry Scott. However, relieved for only a moment, she began frequently summoning Scott to her house.
Just when you finally graduated from a distant university and got a job locally, you're getting married. I've been so lonely. Why'd you like Kristen have a break and stay with me for a week or so?
Such messages would arrive for Scott, terrifying me. Showing me the message, he asked, what should we do? In his place. I called Evelyn right there and then. I'm sorry for the inconvenience after your kind consideration, but we still haven't finished unpacking and handling paperwork from the move. I think it will be a while before Scott can relax. Sorry.
Just unpack by yourself. Don't always rely on my son.
She grumbled, but I simply nodded along and ended the call. Her offer to ease my burden was just a pretext, but she wanted her beloved son by her side. My anger rose towards Evelyn for her lack of consideration, even though we were newlyweds, and also towards Scott, who just laughed off the situation and wouldn't say no. Here's according to him. Evelyn has always been like this. Her overprotectiveness worsened after divorcing Scott's father, and she even cried and tried to stop him from going to college. Somehow, he convinced her and went, but they kept in constant contact through messages and calls. He trusts his mother, who raised him as a single parent, so their relationship has always been good, as I knew from our dating days. It's great to be caring towards a child and a mother, but as adults, there should be a proper distance. However, this closeness was normal for them, and I knew it wasn't right to interfere in another family's dynamics. If it weren't for this, Scott, who is serious about both work and house chores and has a good personality, would have been perfect, so I tried to accept it. But it wasn't long before I couldn't overlook the excessive closeness between the two. One holiday, when Scott usually sleeps till noon, he woke up earlier than me and started preparing to go out. "Did we have plans to go somewhere today?" he asked.
I'm going out shopping with Mommy, so you can stay and sleep. And he replied,
Definitely. Evelyn wanted to buy clothes and asked him for his opinion. Angry at his willingness to go. "We have a day off together for the first time in a while. Let's do something." I controlled my emotions and suggested, but Scott shook his head. "I'd like that, but I've already promised Mommy, and she seems to be waiting outside." Shocked by his words, I went to the entrance in my pajamas, just looking out the window, missing my gaze. Evelyn got out of her car, smirking with her bright red lipstick.
Scott, you're late. Oh my goodness, whoop-de-tum. This kid is still asleep. Such a lazy wife for my son. Maybe I should buy you an alarm clock as a souvenir? As mocking me, she affectionately took Scott's hand and led him to the passenger seat.
I was dumbfounded by their close relationship and could only watch Evelyn's car drive away swiftly. After this incident, Scott's behavior began to change gradually. He hardly did any housework. He used to do routinely and often went to his mother's house almost every weekend. His attitude towards me changed too, becoming more demanding. "Kristen, you're too lazy. If I'm off, you just sleep along. Can you call that fulfilling your duties as a housewife? You don't even put on makeup when you're at home. It's not good to slack off just 'cause you're a wife. Mommy is worried about you too. Why did you visit her alone sometime?" I didn't know what Evelyn was saying about me, but his agreement was troubling. He had never mentioned napping or makeup during a relationship. But as he said, perhaps Evelyn was genuinely concerned about my behavior. I tried to convince myself of this multiple times, but knowing Evelyn's behavior towards Scott, it seemed more like harassment. I thought Evelyn's curse would change once we had a child. Soon after my doubts about Scott began, I discovered I was pregnant. He was thrilled, promising to support me. But Evelyn's harassment intensified, summoning Scott for trivial tasks like shopping, doctor visits, and cleaning her house, effectively leaving me alone. When I explained Evelyn's malicious intentions to him, it backfired. Suddenly, he became infuriated and said, "Every time Mommy sees you, she talks about you. How you should go back to your parents' house, or how you need time alone. Getting angry over such things will affect the baby in your womb. Just indulge in Mommy's feelings." He began leaving me alone more often. As time passed, my morning sickness worsened, and I told him I wanted him to stay with me as much as possible because I felt uneasy being alone. But Scott replied, "What can I do even if I'm with you?" Mommy also wanted to be alone during her pregnancy, didn't even want to see Dad's face. Feeling physically and mentally unstable, I lost the energy to argue back and resolved to fight this battle alone. Then, one day, while Scott and I were shopping for baby items, we bumped into his colleague who said to me,
"Scott, you're kind. I heard you've been actively attending parenting classes. Your home bookshelf is filled with parenting books. Right. Accompanying your wife for shopping today, you're gonna be a great dad for shoe foreign. Can't wait for your child to be born."
Shocked, I blurted out. Scott quickly intervened, "Please stop," laughing off in a joking manner. This turns out, Scott had been pretending at work to be an attentive new father, even fabricating stories. I kept silent about this to his colleague to avoid any trouble, but felt a rising anger inside. Still, he continued to prioritize his time with Evelyn, and whenever I met his colleagues,
Your wife has caught herself an ideal husband.
Such incidents gradually made me distrust his actions and words. I can't say for sure if this stress was the cause, but one weekend while preparing lunch, I noticed my pants were wet. A thought crossed my mind, and I rushed to the bathroom. As I suspected, my water had broken. I yelled towards the room where Scott was still sleeping, telling him to get the car ready immediately. He, still groggy, became anxious upon hearing about the water break and supported me as I walked. The nurses had repeatedly told us to come to the hospital immediately if my water broke, as there could be urgent risks. Scott, slightly panicked, helped me into the car amidst my contractions. Just as we started driving, his mobile phone rang. Unable to answer while driving, I glanced at the screen while struggling with the pain. Seeing Evelyn's name, I had a bad feeling. The phone kept ringing, and after staring at the screen for a while, I reluctantly answered.
Scott, where are you? It's Wednesday, Wednesday, the day of my sewing class. Acerbe oleo. Dear bitch.
Her flirting voice terrified me, but I explained to her, Evelyn, actually, my water just broke, and Scott is taking me to the hospital right now.
As soon as I spoke to Marjorie, Evelyn yelled as if she was a different person. That's your problem, isn't it? I don't care. I don't care. Seeing Scott, who's resting as a taxi, is quite a position you're in. Or I talk to Scott. It is my regular sewing class day, and I have a prior appointment. I
was speechless at her disregard, even for her grandchild's well-being. Her shrill voice continued to echo, even as I remained silent.
Sorry, Kristen.
Scott muttered. For a moment, I thought he was apologizing for Evelyn yelling at me, but then I realized Scott had walked around to the back seat where I was lying and opened the door, confused and enduring the pain. I was stunned. Then he said, I had promised to drive Mommy, so could you take a taxi or an ambulance from here? I'll definitely catch up later, so go ahead. Wait a minute. Are you prioritizing a sewing class over your own child? Since you won't listen to me, please convince Evelyn yourself. The pain is getting worse, hurry. I raised my voice out of desperation, but he, frowning as well, replied, It's a weekly commitment, can't be helped, right? I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you about it. Here's some money, please manage with this. He took out $20 from his wallet and shoved it into my bag. Then he got back in the driver's seat and left without hesitation. I can't believe it. The place where he dropped me off was still close to our house. Concerned about the neighbors seeing me, I hurriedly searched for taxi company. The amniotic fluid continued to trickle down my legs, and panic set in as I realized the danger to my unborn child, and tears welled up in my eyes as I struggled with the phone, wondering why my baby and I had to suffer like this. Startled, I turned around and saw a familiar face. Virtue looked terrible. Forget talking, just get in the car. The person got out of their car, gently supported me, and helped me into the back seat. Her husband adjusted the seat and drove. My memory of what followed is hazy. Upon reaching the hospital, I was quickly wheeled in a wheelchair and taken to a prepared room by nurses. The pain was so severe that I was moaning, but I was told there was still time before delivery, so I rested there. The pain was so intense that I nearly lost consciousness, and suddenly, my mobile phone rang. Thinking it might be a callback from a call to my mother during the journey, I was shocked to see it was Scott. Looking at the clock, it was already evening. 3 hours had passed since I left, and in disbelief, I decided not to answer. But as the calls persisted, I answered in irritation. Kristen, help me. I want you to explain the situation. Just not a single word of concern for me, and I had no idea what had happened to him. Help me. That's it. Even if he was being eaten by a crocodile, I had no obligation to help someone who could abandon his own child. Who do you think you are, saying such things? I yelled through the phone at him and hung up. Sometime later, I went into labor alone, though I wished for Scott's support. I was better off without a foolish man who couldn't prioritize correctly. Instead, a kind nurse supported me, and by late night, my much-awaited baby was born safely. Exhausted, I fell asleep quickly after the birth. The next morning, a nurse came to my room, first thing to tell me that Scott had come. Apparently, he had arrived right after the birth, but seeing how deeply I was sleeping, the nurse kindly sent him away. Honestly, I felt I never needed to see him again, but when he entered the room looking tired, I couldn't help but ask him what happened. The person who picked me up and took me to the hospital was Misty, an older lady in the neighborhood with whom I was always friendly. She had been like a mother to me, caring for me like her own daughter since I was newly married and insecure. When she asked about Scott in the car, I told her he was taking Evelyn to her hobby class, and she got angry as if it were her own matter. Little did I know that this would end up cornering Scott after dropping me off. Misty spread the story throughout the neighborhood, being sociable and always chatting with friends. Her influence was significant, and her friends seemed to have confronted Scott en masse. The trouble that he wanted help with was apparently this situation. With that, a huge commotion had formed around our house. As panicked as he was, seeking my help in that situation was clearly a lack of intelligence. I hadn't heard from Evelyn at all, and my mind was already made up. I'm sorry, but can you leave? I'm not feeling well, and my parents are about to arrive. Do our parents know about this? I want to apologize. Can I stay? He spoke in a pitiful, muttering voice. What are you saying? I don't care about your apologies. I'm busy, so please leave. Don't say that. Where's the baby? I just want to see her. And then I'll go. Just leave. There are other pregnant women here, so get out. I replied coldly, and as he still stood there, I turned my back, lay down, and covered myself with a blanket. Hey, I'm sorry. Can you call Mommy for me? I want to send her a picture of the baby. Can I call a nurse? Unbelievably, Scott reached out and shook me, just as I was about to lose my patience and push him away. What are you doing? Don't touch her. My parents entered the room. My mother rushed to my side and pushed him away. How dare you shake someone who just gave birth? And to show up without considering the situation. I'm disappointed in you. Get out now. Her fierceness, which I had never seen before, overwhelmed Scott, and he finally left the room. My father followed him, likely giving Scott a thorough scolding. During my hospital stay, I refused to see him and took the baby back to my parents' house after being discharged. Be concerned about him doing something. I initiated the divorce over the phone without meeting him. I told him about the divorce papers to be mailed and the compensation claim, ignoring any objections from him. The compensation was for the scrapes and bruises I got when he forcefully made me get out of the car. He tried to make excuses, but I silenced him by mentioning the testimony of Misty and her husband and the photos of the injuries taken that day. The lawyer said the costs for his malicious actions towards a pregnant woman would be significant. While I was busy with the baby, Evelyn barged into my parents' house once. The rumor spread by Misty persisted, and the neighbor's gaze was cold. She blamed everything on me for not respecting her and her son, but my strict father handled it all. Both Evelyn and Scott were dealt with by my father, making me think it should have been this way from the start. But he said
that the head of the family doesn't always stand out in the open.
He was strangely trying to be cool about it. When I became accustomed to parenting, I invited Misty to my parents' house and introduced her. She quickly became friends with my mother, as they were of the same generation, and we all agreed to keep in touch. During that visit, Misty shared a story she had heard from a friend who works part-time at my ex-husband's company. Her friend, like Misty, loves gossip, and apparently let slip the story of Scott to others. This quickly spread and was exaggerated, leading to a decline in his reputation. The contrast between his portrayal as a dedicated new father and the reality had a significant impact, and he resigned from his job, facing cold treatment from his bosses and colleagues. Now in his late 30s, jobless and without qualifications, he became a recluse, living off Evelyn's pension and savings, fearful of the neighbor's judgment. Years later, out of the blue, I received another call from him. Hey, where are you? I'm in front of your parents' house, but nobody's inside. His first words were curt, so I responded similarly. Can't you understand? We've moved. What do you want? Moved? Did she use the compensation money I gave you to enjoy yourself? To come back right now? Let's start over. Mommy wants to see you too. Your words make no sense. What would I benefit from going back to you? Still talking about Mommy after all this time? I don't want to hear anything from you, so don't call me again. I hung up without waiting for a reply, and my phone kept lighting up for a while. After finally setting up call blocking, I started receiving messages from him, asking for reconciliation. I read them just in case, but they were all nonsensical, saying things like, don't you feel sorry for the child not having a father? It's ungrateful not to let Mommy see you after all she's done for you. So, I deleted all the messages and changed my email address. Although what happened was awful, it allowed me to proceed with the divorce advantageously and impose sanctions on him. Having such a worthless person in our lives would be worse for my child. Actions thinking so. I've been enjoying a relaxed parenting life, supported by my parents who have become wonderful grandparents.